section 8.1, radical expressions and graphs, and we're not doing the graphs part. A lot of this section is learning how to use your calculator. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of tricks on, I'm going to be showing you on the TI-36X Pro, but the other TI scientific calculators work pretty much the same way, and their buttons are pretty much in the same position. The graphing calculators are different. Actually, these small calculators have capabilities that the graphing calculators do not, and you may actually prefer using a smaller calculator even if you regularly use a graphing calculator. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a calculator to approximate the following. We want to round to the nearest thousandth. Now remember, thousandths, this is your tenth spot, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, so we're going to be rounding to 3 decimal places, which means we also need to look at the fourth, because the fourth will decide whether this number goes up or stays the same. Okay? Now, square root of 5. On these calculators, your square root button is right here next to the 7, but you're going to have to hit second and then hit that. For other kinds of roots, like a cube root or a fourth root, we're going to have to use the button above that. And you can see there's a little box right there, and then the root sign. A little bit of vocabulary before we go on. This symbol, what we often call the square root symbol, this is called a radical. The number under here is called a radicand. And there's usually a number right here, and this number is called the index. Now, if the index is not there, it is an understood 2. This is the only time I can think of where you have an understood 2. We have understood 1s, we have understood 0s, but here it's an understood 2. Okay? Now what a square root is literally asking you about, there's an understood 2 right there, the index. The index tells you you're looking for 2 numbers, well, not 2 numbers, the same number multiplied with itself. So like 2 numbers multiplied by itself, and you want to get the number underneath. So this is asking what number times itself gives you 5. Well, you know that that's not an exact number, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on, hit second, and then that square root button, and I'm going to hit 5. Now what this calculator does is it's going to show you just square root of 5. This is going to be very useful for you in a later section, but that's not what we want right now. We want an approximation, a decimal approximation of the square root of 5. And that's only because we are asked to round here. Most of the time, you're going to give an exact answer. But to make this give you a decimal approximation, it's really kind of hard to see here. But right by the 3, you can see that there's a little double arrow there, and then maybe because it's the squiggly equal sign, that means it's an approximation button, and that's also the button that will transfer back and forth between, say, a decimal and a fraction. So I'm going to hit that button right here, and then it's going to give me this big ugly decimal. Okay, so the square root of 5 is approximately equal to this. Now I want 3 decimal places, so I look at the fourth, which is a 0. So that 6 is going to stay the same. This is approximately equal to 2.236. Okay, I want to do the same thing for the square root of 21. So second, then that square root button, 21 equals, it gives me again the square root of 21. I hit that approximation button again, and I get this. Now I'm asked to round to the nearest thousandth, which is that 3rd spot. So I look at the 4th, which is a 5. So this is going to bump up to a 3. So this is approximately equal to 4.583. Okay, so let's do it. Find the approximation for the square root of 32. Now you'll see that this does give you something even different. We're going to learn about this in the next section. And you're going to really enjoy this capability on these smaller calculators. But I want an approximation, so I hit that button again. 3 decimal places. The 4th is an 8, so that's going to bump up to a 7. So this rounds to, or this is approximately equal to 5.657. Okay. Square root of 22. Let's do it again. Square root 22. Hit the approximation button. And my third digit is a 0. The fourth digit is a 4, so this is going to stay a 0. It is important that you do not drop this 0. If you were asked to round to 3 decimal places, you want something in that third decimal place. It's a matter of telling you how precise your estimation is. So you definitely don't want to lose that. So square root of 22 is approximately 4.690. And that's what they're looking for. Okay. So let's look at this. We want to calculate the given nth roots. So the nth root is just your index, whatever that is. Okay? So right here, this is a cube root of 27. Okay? So we've talked about the cube root of 27 before when we talked about sum of cubes, difference of cubes back in chapter 6. But right here, I'm going to show you how to enter it. You're going to hit that 3 first. Okay, because it's a third root, you hit the index first. And then we're going to, instead of the square root button, we're going to go to the one above it, the one that has a spot for the index. So you hit second and then that one, and you can see that the 3 becomes the index on the root. Enter 27, and it will give you your answer is precisely 3. Okay, so let's look here. Negative square root of 36. If you have a negative on the outside, you're going to have a negative answer. Okay? You can use the square root button of 36, but just to prove to you that there's an understood 2 here, and this is, I'm about to do this not a way you would want to normally, I'm going to still use the same button I used for the cube root. I'm just going to hit the index being 2. So the square root of 36, you know that that's 6, and it does give you 6. Okay? So this is negative 6. And by the way, if you enter it precisely like this, negative, then hit your square root 36, it will give you negative 6. Okay? All right, so let's try the fourth root of 625. So I'm going to have to hit 4 and then second and then the one that allows an index, so that becomes a fourth root. 625, hit enter, and I get 5. So this is exactly 5. Okay. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. Up here on this one, we had the negative on the outside. Negatives on the outside are always allowed. They're always okay. Negatives on the inside are not always okay. All right? So I'm going to enter these exactly the way they are in my calculator. Okay? So I'm going to have the fifth root of negative 32. And it tells me my answer is negative 2. Okay? Okay, so let's try this one. The fourth root of negative 16. Domain error. Okay. What we're going to say for this one is that it's not a real number. Okay, we learn how to take care of some special cases of this in a later section. But in general, if you have an odd index, you can have a negative inside. Okay, but if you have an even index, no negative inside. And why? Because if you look right here, this is saying negative 2 times itself 5 times gives you negative 32. So negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. If you look here, we have 5 negatives. When you're multiplying an odd number of negatives, you do get a negative answer. But if I'm doing this 4 times, okay, so if I had a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative, that's 4 negatives, that's going to give me a positive answer. Or I could be multiplying 4 positives together because it's always the same number times itself. But either way, if I'm multiplying 4 negatives or if I'm multiplying 4 positives, I get a positive answer. So there's no way to multiply the same number with itself an even number of times and get a negative. So that's what's not allowed here. We do learn how to take care of square roots of negative numbers. That's a very special case, and we'll be dealing with that later. But for right now, up until the last section in this chapter, it's not a real number.